distinguidos jefes de Estado y de Gobierno, distinguidos jefes de delegaciones, distinguidos invitados, Cuba se siente profundamente honrada con su presencia en ocasión de esta reunión cumbre del Grupo de los 77 y China. Les damos a todos la más calurosa bienvenida. Nos honran en la presidencia el excelentísimo señor Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez, presidente de la República de Cuba. El excelentísimo señor Antonio Guterres, secretario general de las Naciones Unidas. El excelentísimo doctor Sultán Amel Al-Jaber, presidente de la COP28 y enviado especial de Emiratos Árabes Unidos para Cambio Climático. El excelentísimo señor Bruno Rodríguez Parrilla, ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de la República de Cuba. Su Excelencia Ahmed Al-Sayed, ministro de Estado de los Emiratos Árabes Unidos. El excelentísimo señor Simon Steele, secretario ejecutivo de la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático. Su Excelencia embajador Denis Francis, presidente del 78 período de sesiones de la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas, y Su Excelencia la señora Elba Rosa Pérez Montoya, ministra de Ciencia, Tecnología y Medio Ambiente de la República de Cuba. Excelencias, distinguidos delegados, a reiterarles la bienvenida a esta primera cumbre de líderes del Grupo de los 77 y China, en el marco de la Conferencia de las Partes de la Convención Marco de Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático, damos por inaugurada esta importante cita del Sur. Invito al presidente de la República de Cuba a hacer uso de la palabra.
Señor Secretario General de las Naciones Unidas, señor Presidente de la COP28, señor Ministro de Estado de Emiratos Árabes Unidos, Excelencias, distinguidos invitantes y participantes. Mis primeras palabras son de apoyo y solidaridad con Palestina y su heroico pueblo que resiste. Pedimos el cese de la violencia y el genocidio en Gaza. Basta de impunidad a Israel, la potencia ocupante. Reitero aquí, ante ustedes, que Cuba no estará jamás entre los indiferentes y que siempre apoyaremos los esfuerzos internacionales legítimos para poner fin a semejante barbarie. Agradecemos la presencia de todos en esta cumbre de nuestras naciones del sur y les invitamos a reflexionar juntos. De cara a los importantes procesos de esta COP, necesitamos concertar acciones. Cuba concede la mayor importancia a este propósito y lo hacemos desde hace muchos años. En su mensaje como presidente cubano a la Conferencia de las Naciones Unidas sobre Medio Ambiente y Desarrollo en 1992, el comandante en jefe Fidel Castro Ruz, líder histórico de la Revolución Cubana, definió muy claramente la relación medio ambiente-desarrollo. Su opinión, y cito, fue la siguiente: en el mundo subdesarrollado son el propio subdesarrollo y la pobreza los factores principales que multiplican hoy la presión que se ejerce sobre el medio natural. Y en el mundo desarrollado, patrones de vida que estimulan el consumo irracional y propician el derroche y la destrucción de recursos no renovables multiplican a escalas sin precedentes y ante inimaginables las afectaciones y tensiones a que se ve sometido el medio físico, local y global. Más de 3 décadas después, esa relación doblemente lesiva al medio ambiente se ha profundizado de forma dramática en los dos sentidos. La brecha que separa al norte irracionalmente opulento y al sur cada vez más empobrecido se ensancha con elevados costos humanos mientras se dilapidan los recursos que la naturaleza pone a nuestra disposición. En esta 28 conferencia se debe concluir el primer balance global sobre la implementación del Acuerdo de París. Será un contexto de crisis multidimensional en el que las expectativas creadas en torno a la adopción de este histórico acuerdo han sido incumplidas. La ciencia ha confirmado la necesidad de mayores recortes en las emisiones globales y el escaso tiempo que resta para evitar que el incremento de la temperatura global exceda los 1,5 grados e incluso los 2 grados Celsius. Paralelamente, persiste la tendencia de los países desarrollados a trasladar a las naciones en desarrollo la carga de sus obligaciones en materia de mitigación sin renunciar a sus irracionales patrones de producción y consumo. Tampoco contribuyen con los medios de implementación adecuados conforme a los compromisos contraídos bajo la Convención y sus instrumentos conexos, incumpliendo sistemáticamente con el régimen jurídico internacional sobre cambio climático. Todo esto plantea importantes retos para los procesos de negociación de la conferencia. La COP28 todavía puede y debe llevarnos a un balance global realista y aplicable en correspondencia con las diferentes circunstancias y metas de desarrollos nacionales. Alcanzar sin dilaciones un marco para el objetivo global de adaptación y resolver el histórico reclamo de operacionalizar el Fondo para Pérdidas y Daños podrían ser resultados efectivos de esta conferencia. Excelencias, en momentos en los que se habla de una transición justa, las naciones en desarrollo no podemos permitir que el concepto progrese en solitario, sin tener en cuenta los factores que garantizan su consecución, atendiendo a las responsabilidades comunes pero diferenciadas, la equidad y las respectivas capacidades. El elemento central para ello es que se logre sin que verdaderamente nadie quede atrás. Se encuentra en la provisión de los medios de implementación adecuados, incluida la financiación, que es hoy probablemente insuficiente. Al sur no se le puede obligar a escoger entre desarrollo y la acción climática. Ambos factores se encuentran indisolublemente ligados. Es nuestra responsabilidad hacer valer la voz de nuestros pueblos y defender sus legítimos intereses y aspiraciones. Aspiramos que esta cumbre de líderes del Grupo de los 77 y China sea motor impulsor para ese empeño. Muchas gracias. Tengo el honor de conceder la palabra al excelentísimo señor Antonio Guterres, secretario general de las Naciones Unidas.
Señor Presidente, Excellencies, friends, all protocol observed. It is a pleasure to join you today. And let me begin by thanking the G77 and plus China for your strong voice on climate action. Your unity, advocacy and tenacity were essential in securing last year's historic loss and damage agreement. But the challenges keep growing. Many of you face crushing debt burdens, fueled by sky-high borrowing costs that hamper efforts to reduce emissions and protect people from increasingly deadly storms, floods, and droughts. This creates a paradox. For example, Africa is home to 60% of the world's best solar resources. But Africa only received 2% of global renewable energy investments in the last 2 decades. African countries need both the financial and the technical support to unleash the renewables revolution. And the same is true in several other regions. The global stocktake must create the conditions for a surge of global climate ambition in 2025 and beyond. And that requires action in 3 areas. First, finance. Developed countries must clarify the delivery of $100 billion commitment. We need also to see a clear plan to double adaptation finance to $40 billion a year by 2025 as a first step to devoting at least half of all climate finance to adaptation. And we need to see much greater support for the new Loss and Damage Fund. It started well, but with not much money. If you will permit me, I want to pay tribute to Professor Salimul Huq of Bangladesh, who passed away recently, as he was a member of my scientific advisory board and a luminary in the fight for climate justice, and especially in support for loss and damage. Excellencies, climate finance still has a long way to go. Up to 18 times more finance is needed for adaptation to meet the current needs of developing countries. And the International Energy Agency estimates that the transition to net zero in emerging markets and developing economies will cost more than $2 trillion annually by 2030. The outdated international financial architecture must be reformed to reflect the realities of today and to respond to developing country needs, including in relation to the Bretton Woods system. The international financial system must provide an effective debt relief mechanism that supports payment suspensions, longer lending terms, and lower rates. The experience of Zambia demonstrates how fragile was the mechanism put in place by the G20. We need an effective debt relief mechanism, and we need it now. All international financial institutions must also align their policies, plans and programs with the Paris Agreement. And we need to see an increase in the capital base of the multilateral development banks and reform of their business models so that they leverage far more private finance at reasonable cost to developing countries. Grants and concessional finance are essential for leveraging private finance at scale. Yet, just under 30% of developed countries' public climate finance is in the form of grants. That proportion must rise significantly, and the COP28 outcome should say clearly so. Second, emissions must be drastically reduced. Current policies would take us towards a 3-degree rise in global temperature. That spells disaster, particularly for developing countries. The 1.5-degree limit is still possible, but it is on the precipice. The global stocktake must set a clear expectation that countries' 2025 NDCs will align with 1.5-degree limit. And it must set a clear global science-based pathway to get there. We need a just, fair and equitable transition from fossil fuels to renewables. COP28 must commit countries to triple renewables capacity, double energy efficiency, and bring clean energy to all by 2030. And phase out fossil fuels with a roadmap that is equitable and with a time frame compatible with 1.5 degrees is also essential. The very existence of some countries in this room depend on it. Finally, the COP must strengthen international cooperation on climate. We need collaboration between governments and between countries and companies to align all critical emitting sectors with 1.5 degrees, to put a fair price on carbon, to protect everyone on Earth with an effective early warning system, and to support the global transition to net zero by 2050. I have proposed the Climate Solidarity Pact, in which big emitters make extra efforts to cut emissions, and developed countries mobilize financial and technical resources to support emerging economies to do so. My acceleration agenda supercharges those efforts, in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances. That is why I ask countries to fast forward on their net zero timelines so that they get there as soon as possible to 2040 in developed countries and 2050 in emerging economies. To achieve net zero, we also need to deploy clean energy technologies at pace and scale. The extraction of critical minerals from the clean energy revolution, from wind farms to solar panels and battery manufacturing, must be done in a sustainable, fair and just way. Demand for those minerals is set to increase almost fourfold by 2030. At my Climate Ambition Summit, I heard repeated calls from G77 leaders for their countries and communities holding these minerals to fully benefit with maximum local added value. We cannot repeat the mistakes of the past with the systematic exploitation of developing countries reduced to the production of basic raw materials. Today, I'm pleased to announce I'm establishing the panel on critical energy transition minerals. The panel will bring together governments, international organizations, industry and civil society to develop common and voluntary principles to guide extractive industries in the years ahead in the name of justice and sustainability. Excellencies, friends, the final fight to keep 1.5 degrees alive is on, and we are battling for climate justice. These are fights we can win. This COP can end with a double objective: maximum ambition in mitigation and maximum ambition in relation to climate justice, namely taking into full account the interest of developing countries. What we must avoid at all costs is a compromise based on minimum ambition and mitigation and minimum ambition on climate justice. Because developing countries would be losing twice. Would be losing because there is no climate justice, and be losing because without effective mitigation, the dramatic impacts of climate change will be supported essentially by vulnerable populations in the global south. Also, I count on the G77 plus China to keep pushing for the change the world needs, to make this COP a game changer with maximum ambition to reduce emissions and maximum ambition on climate justice to the benefit of developing countries and their populations. Thank you very much.
Agradezco al excelentísimo señor Antonio Guterres, secretario general de las Naciones Unidas, por sus palabras y por su participación en esta importante cita. Cedo la palabra a Su Alteza Sultán Ahmed Al-Jaber, presidente de la COP28. Excelente discurso. Ahora sí has dicho que espero estar en la línea.
Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Excellencies, representatives of many relevant parties and stakeholders, honored guests, allow me first to welcome you to the United Arab Emirates, to Dubai, and to COP28. It is indeed our pleasure to host you here in the UAE, and it is my honor to welcome you in person. Allow me to begin by congratulating Cuba on its very effective and inclusive chairmanship of the G77 and China Group, and for their initiative to host this first ever G77 plus China summit at a COP. You have brought this group together, and you must stay together. The power of the G77 has always been in its unity and should be continued at this COP. This COP already showed the power of that unity on day one. Such historic advancement of the agenda and such historic consensus and agreement on the establishment and operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund is a historic moment that no one can undermine or underestimate. And as such, we have already demonstrated the power of unity on day one. I believe everyone in this room wants the same thing across all climate pillars and in terms of advancing the implementation of everything we have agreed on as part of our agenda. We want promises to be kept. We want global stocktake outcomes that deliver meaningful action. And we want to keep 1.5 within reach. In short, we want a just energy transition. We want an orderly energy transition, an energy transition that is responsible and that leaves no one behind. We want this transition to be with equity at its heart. We want a transition that will deliver real and tangible results and solutions. I have said it before, and I will say it again. We want your help to make this COP to be the COP of action, a COP of action that will change the game and that will restore faith and trust in multilateralism. And I want this COP to be a game-changing COP for the Global South and for emerging markets. And that starts with action by the Global North. They must work hard, diligently, and seriously to restore the trust of the Global South. I see progress on the $100 billion pledge. I see progress and good traction on the Green Climate Fund, and I'm hopeful that some more and new announcements are coming on the way. And with the strengthening of the IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Trust, which will support climate resilience in low-income and vulnerable countries. As you know, the UAE has stepped up to support the IMF Trust by committing $200 million of special drawing rights. The UAE has been with you. The UAE is on your side, and the UAE will continue to stay with you. This presidency will lead a fully transparent and inclusive process. And I need you to be flexible, and I need you to be willing to push yourselves out of your comfort zone. And I need you to be willing to bridge divides and find common ground to achieve the consensus we all want to achieve. Excellencies, I can promise you this. I will give everything to deliver the outcomes at COP28 that we all want. And I will give everything to ensure that we leave no stone unturned. And I will give everything to deliver what the world really needs. But I need your help, and I need you to step up, and I need you to unite, and I need you to work together. I will push for action at every turn, and I will not hold anything back. That means action to restore trust across the board, and action to close the gap on every track, whether it's mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation, including finance. And I will work with all of you. I will work with the G77 to make sure that COP28 is a COP of action, a COP that will deliver results for the Global South. I ask for your support, I ask for your unity, and I know that together we will be able to deliver. I thank you.
Agradezco a Su Alteza Sultán Ahmed Al-Yadek, presidente de la COP28, por sus palabras y reconozco también la comprensión y el apoyo que nos dio para que se pudiera realizar esta cumbre del Grupo de los 77 más China dentro de la COP28. Tengo el gusto de conceder ahora la palabra al excelentísimo señor Ahmed Al-Sayed, ministro de Estado de los Emiratos Árabes Unidos, quien intervendrá a nombre del presidente de Emiratos Árabes Unidos, Su Alteza el Jeque Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan.
أصحاب الفخامة والسعادة، السيدات والسادة الضيوف الكرام، إنه لشرف عظيم أن أكون هنا اليوم في اجتماع مجموعة 77 والصين في مؤتمر الأطراف 28 COP28، وبالنيابة عن صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد آل نهيان رئيس دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة، أود أن أتقدم بتحياتي الحارة إلى جميع الحاضرين هنا. أولاً وقبل كل شيء أود أن أهنئ كوبا على رئاستها الناجحة لمجموعة 77 والصين. إن اجتماعنا هنا هو شهادة على الالتزام المشترك للدول بالتصدي للتحدي الكبير المتمثل في تغير المناخ والعمل بشكل جماعي على تمهيد الطريق لمستقبل مستدام. شرعت دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة في رحلة طموحة نحو الاستدامة والطاقة المتجددة. نحن أول دولة في المنطقة توقع وتصدق على اتفاقية باريس، وأول دولة تلتزم بخفض الانبعاثات على مستوى الاقتصاد، وأول دولة في المنطقة تعلن عن مبادرة استراتيجية للحياد المناخي بحلول عام 2050. ونحن نعتقد أنه بالعمل معاً يمكننا تحقيق المزيد، وهذا ينطبق على معالجة تداعيات تغير المناخ. إن الطبيعة العابرة للحدود الوطنية لتغير المناخ تعني أن التعاون العالمي أصبح أكثر أهمية من أي وقت مضى، ومن الممكن أن تعمل منصات مثل مجموعة 77 والصين كصوت للاقتصادات النامية والناشئة على المستوى الدولي وتعزيز الحوار المثمر والبناء. السيدات والسادة، تدرك دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة التي تقع كحلقة وصل على مفترق الطرق بين الشرق والغرب أهمية التعاون الدولي في التصدي لتغير المناخ. باعتبارنا مركزاً للطاقة والتجارة والسياحة والخدمات اللوجستية والتكنولوجيا، فإننا في وضع متميز لبناء الجسور وتعزيز الإجماع لتسريع التقدم المناخي الشامل. وباعتبار دولة الإمارات مقراً للوكالة الدولية للطاقة المتجددة آيرينا، فإن نهج دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة مبني على بناء الجسور مع المجتمع الدولي. وقد استثمرت دولة الإمارات أكثر من 50 مليار دولار في مشاريع الطاقة النظيفة في 6 قارات، بما في ذلك 27 دولة من الدول الجزرية الصغيرة المعرضة لتداعيات ظاهرة تغير المناخ. يعد الإعلان عن صندوق الخسائر والأضرار بمثابة إنجاز كبير سيخدم الدول التي تقف وتقع على الخطوط الأمامية لتغير المناخ. وباعتبارها الدولة المضيفة لمؤتمر الأمم المتحدة المعني بتغير المناخ COP28، فإن دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة ملتزمة بالعمل مع شركائها لمواجهة هذا التحدي العالمي، وتلتزم رئاسة دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة بتقديم مؤتمر الأطراف 28 الشامل والموجه نحو الحلول، والذي سيقدم نتائج ملموسة بشأن التخفيف والتكيف والخسائر والإضرار والتمويل. سيد الرئيس، أأمل أن نخرج من هذا الاجتماع بالتزام لا يتزعزع بالعمل المناخي، وعزم متجدد على التعاون والتفاني المشترك لبناء عالم مستدام للأجيال القادمة. شكرا لكم، شكرا جزيلا.
Agradezco al excelentísimo señor Ahmed Al-Sayed, ministro de Estado de Emiratos Árabes Unidos, por su intervención, y doy ahora la palabra al excelentísimo señor Simón Estiel, secretario ejecutivo de la Convención Marco de Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático.
Excellencies, honorable delegates, friends. As a former G77 plus China minister from Grenada, it's good to be amongst friends. Leaders in this room represent the majority of humanity. The decisions you make will help decide our collective futures. You have the power to move negotiations here in Dubai towards fair, just, and equitable outcomes. Your decisive action led to the decision to create the Loss and Damage Fund, an historic achievement. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says about 3.5 billion people, half of humanity, live in areas highly vulnerable to climate change. I don't need to tell you that huge numbers of those people are in G77 countries. It is deeply unjust that they should face the consequences of a problem they did not cause, and that those problems should be made worse by a multi-dimensional crisis of debt, cost of capital, inflation, and stagnant economic growth. Yet the progress I have seen across this group of countries is impressive. A number of countries are working to increase renewable energy, energy efficiency, and forest cover. This is action that benefits climate, but this is also development. It can lead to more economic growth, more jobs, and more opportunity. There is no trade-off between climate and the development agenda. The real threat is inaction. Yet despite commendable climate action, particularly in developing countries, progress overall has been slow, too slow. We have only taken baby steps towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. We are not slowing climate change fast enough. A key outcome of COP28 will be the conclusion of the first global stocktake. Here in Dubai, we have an opportunity to course correct. We must choose to build on the global stocktake and deliver tangible, ambitious outcomes and send political signals that much more climate action is coming. And to make this happen, there must be more finance and support from developed to developing countries, investment across every sector of every economy. Finance is the great enabler of climate action. You will be supported in your efforts. As a neutral broker and honest facilitator, we at the UNFCCC are here to help. In return, I urge you to set an example at COP28. Collaborate to push for the highest levels of ambition. Set your response ambition as high as possible on mitigation and adaptation. This is your opportunity to answer, once and for all, what balance looks like, and demand the means of implementation to make ambition and balance a reality. Thank you for your leadership, and I look forward to your contributions here in Dubai. I thank you.
Agradezco la presencia y contribución del excelentísimo señor Simón Still, secretario ejecutivo de la Convención Marco de Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático. Y aprovecho también la ocasión para reconocer el amplio apoyo brindado por los Emiratos Árabes Unidos, en particular por el presidente de la COP y por la Secretaría de la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático, que ha posibilitado la celebración de esta reunión cumbre que por primera vez se celebra como parte del Grupo de los 77 y China en los marcos de una COP de cambio climático. Concedo a continuación la palabra a Su Excelencia el embajador Denis Francis, presidente del 78 periodo de sesiones de la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas.
His Excellency Miguel Díaz-Canel, President of Cuba, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, President of COP28, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. Allow me first to recognize with deep appreciation the government of Cuba as chair of the G77 and China for its exceptional leadership in successfully navigating a tumultuous year. As our world continues to be challenged by multiple interconnected and cross-cutting crises, strategic leadership of the Global South is needed more than ever, particularly on climate change. Multifaceted crises permeate every corner of our planet, severely affecting every country and community. Yet these crises affect us all, though with varying impacts and on different scales. The severe economic, social, and environmental devastation from climate change create more debilitating consequences for developing countries, despite having made only a minuscule contribution to this crisis. Naturally, this is most worrisome in least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, that is, among the most vulnerable. It is therefore essential that COP28 delivers an ambitious series of climate action outcomes, outcomes that reaffirm and strengthen the path to the 1.5-degree target, outcomes that accelerate adaptation to assist and support those most vulnerable, struggling on the front lines, and that produces a bold outcome on the promise made in Sharm el-Sheikh to put in place a fund and funding arrangements for loss and damage. In the context of loss and damage, it is therefore refreshing and hopeful that the fund has now been capitalized through pledges made by our host, the United Arab Emirates and Germany, and several others. This constitutes a special achievement for the G77 and China, whose insistence on the creation of this mechanism is well known. Now that the fund is established, it is hoped that other countries will follow the strategic leadership of the UAE and Germany and ensure the sufficiency of resources in the fund to underwrite the financial requirements for the adoption of adequate adaptation mechanisms. Excellencies, on each of these fronts, I must commend the work of the G77 and China. Members of this diverse group have undoubtedly been leading the charge to shift to renewable energy, as indeed they have been leading the calls for building resilience. They have spearheaded debates on climate finance, including pushing for the reform of the international financial architecture that would afford developing countries better access to development funding without the overhang of unsustainable debt levels. A crucial priority for the G77 and China has also been to secure the actual implementation of the long-promised $100 billion to support climate action. And they have been instrumental in both prioritizing loss and damage, as well as in maintaining support for the global goal on adaptation. As the President of the General Assembly, I am here to tell you that all the foregoing priorities are consistent with and indeed underscore many of the fundamental values and principles of the United Nations, such as solidarity, cooperation, inclusion, and assisting and supporting the weaker to ensure that no one is left behind. As mentioned during my address to world leaders yesterday, it is my intention to convene a Sustainability Week in April 2024 to address the dynamics of sustainability in relation to infrastructure, transportation, tourism, and of course, energy. We must continue to push the needle on these sectors that are so essential to modern economies, that yet constitute some of the greatest contributors to atmospheric emissions. As I conclude, I invite the G77 and China to join me in making that week a success and to further build on what I hope will be a significant and impactful result from this COP28. Once again, I very much appreciate the privilege to participate in this G77 and China Leaders Summit, and I look forward with anticipation to working constructively with you here at COP and back in New York to secure ambitious, credible, transformative climate action that justly places sustainability at the very apex of our endeavors to stabilize atmospheric temperatures. I thank you.
Agradezco a Su Excelencia, Embajador Denis Francis, Presidente del 78 Periodo de Sesiones de la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas, y con su intervención doy por concluida esta sesión de inauguración. Les pido permanecer en sus puestos para en 3 minutos poder despedir a nuestros distinguidos invitados y continuar esta sesión.